Perfect. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So today's show, I always say it's going to be interesting, but I think it's going to be very highly interesting. And I think this is one of the episodes that if you don't have pen and paper, I'm going to give you a couple seconds to go get some pen and paper because we're going to drop some information on here. This individual that we're interviewing, I'm going to deem him the Refocus Boss and I would say for obvious reasons, but it only makes sense. It's kind of like when you hear his story about the way he grew up and the environment he grew up in. He kind of grew up in an entrepreneurial household to a certain extent, and then he took these different information and he built it, and he was like, oh, look at this opportunity, oh, supply and demand, and he kind of added on, and then he ended up with agency. So we're going to talk about how do you go from essentially selling chocolate to then becoming like this international agency that kind of specializes in a particular market sector. So Raman, why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what we're talking about?
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks very much for having me on the show. You do a great job interviewing your guests, so it's an honor for me to be here with you today. So, yeah, for background, my name is Raman Sehgal, and I wear a few different hats, but my main hat is I am the founder of a business called Ramarketing, and we're a kind of full service marketing agency that you would expect, but we absolutely specialize in the pharmaceutical and biopharma supply chain, which makes us not just a niche agency, but a really super niche agency. So we're about
Yeah.
65 people now across Europe and the US. And so, yeah, pretty fast growing organization. Just actually a few months ago, we received a private equity investment, which is quite unusual in the marketing agency space, which was a big moment for me personally in my journey as an entrepreneur, and that kind of felt like a success milestone, but also a kind of the start of a new kind of era and step up for where we're taking the organization.
So I mean, I love branding, and then just hearing you pronounce the name of Remarkable, and obviously, when you think about the definition of remarkable, was that the reason why? And obviously, it's a play on different words. It's a play with your name. It's a play on Markable. So like, let's talk about the story of how did you come up with that branding?
Um, I would love to give you a story about how we did a full brand strategy and how we did it, how we actually do it for our clients. The reality was, I had an opportunity to set up a company because I got asked to do some PR from a pharmaceutical manufacturing company that I used to work for. And I was on a night out with a few friends. We were having a few beers. I was like, oh my God, we need to think of a name. And like we were like joking, saying, oh, like we'll take the start of your name and just like tag it onto marketing. And we were like, that's like the worst name ever. And then I literally couldn't think of anything else. So I set the company up as remarketing in 2009, thinking I'll change it at some point, but it's become synonymous with who we are and what we do. It's obviously linked. It's funny you mentioned the remarkable thing. We have done a couple of campaigns around remarkable remarketing in our journey, but no, it was linked to my name and a drunken joke, which ended up being the name of the business.
I think that's a hell of a segue because you're talking about the sense of humor and like if you get an opportunity to the listener, if you can kind of go to his Instagram page and you have like a pretty interesting style of content, right? And I think it's called the funniest moment in PR. So like I want to talk about that a bit because I mean obviously ending on that funny story, like how did you come up with this concept or like where are you finding the content for these funny moments in PR?
I mean, for us, I mean, we've always tried to be quite humorous with the way that we actually market ourselves up. We have a cheekiness to our brand, which is quite important. And I think I remember years ago we did a play on agencies, for example, would say we don't have juniors on our account, or we don't handcuff our team to the desk. And I was like deadpan saying this to the camera. And then in the background, you could see all the staff like chained up at their desks. And then we would say things like, we don't have any kids at work here, just professionals. And we got all the kids, like so my kids were there and my colleagues, and there was like loads of babies running around in the background. And, you know, we work in a very serious industry in reality. We work in the pharmaceutical sector, but, you know, at the end of the day, marketing is a lot of it is resonating with your audience and being memorable and, sometimes just making them smile. So even, I know we'll come on to talk about the book, I put quite a lot of kind of humorous anecdotes in there just because I think stories tend to stick and humor is a good way of actually just making people remember who you are and what you do.
So I mean, I think to your point, I mean that's hell of interesting because in the pharmaceutical space, usually it's kind of cut and dry. It's usually a numbers game, trying to sell more product. So you're bringing humor into that. So I kind of want to like talk about like why did you pick that particular space, considering like your background. I mean, you didn't start off in pharmaceutical. Like, why
Yeah,
did you end up in pharmaceutical?
yeah, it's a great question. So I kind of fell into the pharmaceutical sector. One of the first jobs I did, one of my first clients was a clinical trial manufacturing company, and this was in the early 2000s. And I just found it a really interesting industry. Actually, I just was like, this is completely different. I thought I was going to go into consumer marketing. I worked for Heinz, as in the big Pittsburgh brand, and I enjoyed the experience, but I just found it quite frustrating because as I just had loads of ideas, and ideas don't really go anywhere in those types of organizations because there's just so many layers of sign off. And what I quite liked about the pharmaceutical sector was it was quite dry and conservative, but it was also quite old school. So, I was like optimizing websites and playing with ad campaigns in 2004, 2005, and no one else was doing it back then. I was probably the only guy in the world like playing around in this sector doing that. And the client that I was working for was getting some amazing results. And I ended up just really loving that sector and getting to know it more and more. I love the global nature of it, so I would travel quite a bit. And it's exciting as in my early 20s, going to Madrid. I remember going to New Orleans for a conference, and it was an amazing. This was pre-Instagram or
Mm-hmm.
social media and all that kind of stuff. It was a really exciting time. And so when I kind of decided to go full time with the business, we did actually at one point have clients in loads of different sectors, but we always had a core of clients in life sciences and pharmaceuticals. And for us, actually, we aren't on the product marketing side. We're actually in the supply chain, the business to business, trade and technical, the really boring scientific stuff, which no one wants to go near. But actually, that niche is super global. It's super excitement. It's where a lot of modern drugs are actually developed and processed. And one of the things that I remember doing in 2015, we were going through a rough patch in the business, and I felt like we were losing clients as quick as we were winning them.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this, a combination of different tools that I came across, and I did this analysis of our clients, looking at clients by high and low maintenance and high and low profit. Say we had 30 clients at the time, and I remember the 15 clients that were in like the low maintenance, high profit box were pretty much all in the B2B trade and technical and pharmaceutical sector. And it felt like a realization moment, like a penny dropping moment, saying like, why am I doing all this other stuff? And I remember reading Seth Godin's books around that time as well. And he was talking about, the phrase he used, which I love, is being meaningfully specific, right? Like you can get real traction when you are very specific to or very meaningful to a specific audience. So I took the view in 2016 that we were going to basically say goodbye to half of our clients and go big on one space. And I mean, at the time, it was a risky decision. It was courageous. It was crazy. It was whatever adjective you want to use. But what actually happened having done that analysis, it brought great clarity to the way that we operated, how we marketed ourselves, who we went after, who we hired, which events we went to. Like it became like it was like I used it's like putting my contact lenses in. It was like, oh, I can see again, right? And that really gave us traction, and it gave us kind of a platform to grow internationally. So like a lot of good business stories that came, our niching down and focus on one sector came from painful experience of trying to be everything to everyone and actually just getting kind of lost and in the middle of nowhere, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to as well.
I think it's hella fascinating because I mean, obviously, doing my due diligence and reading your story, and it's kind of like you're repeating where you were in your adolescence. I mean, like you were known in school for selling particular chocolate, right? And then after you were talking about supply and demand, and then you went into like garments a little bit. So like, just talk about that because again, what you just said pretty much depicts what you've done before in the past.
You have done your research very well. This is old school research. Very good. Yeah, I mean, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur ever, like, and maybe until maybe 10, 11 of running the business. And you kind of and only when I moved to the US, actually, I really started to embrace the phrase founder and entrepreneur, because it's so much more celebrated and respected in North America than it is in the UK. I'm not saying the UK is bad in that sense, but like I remember my wife's a doctor, and we had dinner with friends of one of my kids, and her parents were physicians, and we were talking about that. One was a pediatric, and one was a endocrinologist, and then they just couldn't believe I had my own company. They were like in awe of the fact, and I was just like, "Wow, isn't it crazy that these are unbelievably talented people?" So I've clearly had this entrepreneurial streak in me, and my parents, as you mentioned at the start, were they had their own stores, and they came from they were immigrants from India to England, and they had their own shops and stuff like that. So it's very much been in the family. And when I was a kid, I used to, I used to work in my parents' post office when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I mean, it seems crazy now. It's blatant child labor, right? But at the time, it was helpful for the family. I used to get free candy, and it was a win-win situation, and that kind of developed. And when I went into kind of school, so maybe 12, 13 years old, I used to, my mom was my supplier of like candy, and then I would mark it up and sell it at school. And then the days the vending machines went down,
Mhm.
we'd make good, I'd make good money. And then a friend of mine started, like a cousin of mine started importing Tommy Hilfiger from and Tommy Hilfiger wasn't really in the UK. This was probably in the mid 90s, and he had a supplier in a part of the UK. He was getting Tommy Hilfiger gear, and he was selling it and he had a shop in the center of the city. And I was like, okay, I reckon I could sell some of this gear in school. So I was selling Tommy Hilfiger jumpers and jeans and all this type of stuff. And and that was just seemed like a normal thing to do. I didn't really know any different, but just, I suppose, to your point, recognized an opportunity.
Mhm.
So okay, I can fulfill a need here and make some money at the same time. Everyone's happy, and that was about as complicated as it got. So yeah, and then I ended up doing marketing as my qualification into college.
Nice, nice. So for the listener, I want you to like, you ever see your kid probably leaving the house with more clothes on or a bigger bag than they should be leaving with? Just keep in mind, like that you may have this individual in your house growing up right now, going to school, promoting products and selling clothes that they don't want anymore. So that's a
That's
good,
it.
good intuition. So I mean, like, if you could define yourself in 3 to 5 words, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
That's a good question. I'm very driven, I would say. Um, I'm pretty friendly and genuine is probably the words I would describe. I'm also impatient, but they're
Mm,
not all good words. I like to things to be. I have an idea I want to do quickly, and I get frustrated when it takes forever. And so, yeah, that can be a real flaw, but it's also a really useful skill because it forces things to make things happen. But I like to think of myself as a pretty normal, friendly guy that I'm the guy that likes to have a beer at the bar and say hi to people and all that type of stuff. But I am pretty disciplined and driven in terms of succeeding and meeting my goals, and that's something I'm not really sure where it comes from. It's hard to, I've been asked that question before. It's difficult for me to find one specific reason other than I live my life thinking, if I ended tomorrow, would I regret anything? And that's the way, life can be very short, and we've probably all had experiences where friends have got sick, or people have passed away at a very young age. And I kind of think I always live my life that if it ended today, like, I'd look back and say, like, you know what, I packed everything I could into that life. And that doesn't mean jumping out of airplanes and parachuting and doing crazy stuff. It just means being mindful and meaningful with your time, with the people that are around you. And something that we do as a family is we always have things to look forward to, right? So that's a really, so whether it's taking my kids away for the weekend, or having a date night with my wife, or going on vacation, like, just have things constantly to look forward to. And for us as a family, and I've always found that to be a really useful way of just kind of maintaining good mental health and kind of happiness.
Well, I mean, to add to that, I mean, I would think, I mean, obviously we just met, but doing the research, I would think that you're pretty outspoken as well too. I mean, you're not the person that kind of holds your thoughts behind like a brick wall. You kind of speak your mind and say what it is, and I think that that's kind of helped you to get to where you are as well too. I mean, you kind of cut through the bullshit to move forward. And again, is that a correct statement, or am I completely off?
No, that's a really interesting point. I suppose it's opinionated in a measured way. Like, I'm not like I don't like to be controversial for the sake of being controversial. I know when I lived in the US, when the election was going on, you would find people would just say outlandish things just to cause the controversy. Whereas I think for me, if I look at say the review, you can't help it when you've written the book and you go onto Amazon and you look at the reviews and and what's really fascinating is I look for the same words, and the words that keep on repeated is authentic, is honest, is I think the word brutal is used because I try and share my mistakes as much as in the things that I got wrong and the things I wish I'd done differently, because I actually think in those are actually a lot of learnings for other people, rather than just, that's why I think your show is fantastic, because you have people come on, you tell the truth about what it's like to run a business and found a business and all the crap that comes with it, and not just all the glory that people see, and people just see running a business is this most glamorous thing in the world. Of course it has it. I went to a brilliant dinner with accountants took us out to a really fantastic meal and all that kind of stuff last night, but they're few and far between. The reality is it's discipline, hard work for years and years. And so for me, I think making sure that people don't think running your business is a walk in the park, because yourself, it's not. Like, you've got to put in the hours, you've got to put in the hard work, and you got to take people on the journey, and that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think the fact that you brought up reviews, and it's kind of like you read reviews all the time. You hear about these 5-star reviews, and it was one of your reviews that I read. I think it was on Facebook, and it was like awesome, amaze balls, downright effective PR, and like that just resonated with me. It was just kind of like, who? First of all, who the hell says that? And second of all, they say it about your company. So I think from behind the scenes, you had to kind of look at that as kind of like you're doing something right, because obviously your community of people understand you, and at the same time they're delivering and saying, "Dude, you're doing amazing or amaze ball work," right?
Amazable. That's a very throwback UK word as well. So yeah, no, it's fantastic to get the positive feedback, but I'm also one of these that's very reflective in how we can do things better. So I don't look at negative comments and get too teary eyed over them, because I think often there's some truth in some of them. But in you use the word reflection. I think like I'm a big believer in self reflection, and actually just like I journal every day, and I kind of look at how I can improve myself constantly and what aspects of my life I need to get better at. And I think that constant evaluation of yourself. The thing is, now we can always produce so much. We're all got watches that tell us how many steps we've done or what, all that kind of stuff. We have all the tools to give us real life data on ourselves now. Why on earth would we not use it to just constantly improve ourselves? And I get that's annoying to some people because they want to sit and watch Netflix all day or play Fortnite or whatever. But I'm not. That's not how I'm wired, and I'm probably like most of your listeners. I'm wired to just try and be the best I can be, and it's probably the same for you guys. And in my experience, that comes from just reflecting, speaking to the people around you about how you can be better, how you can be a better father, how you can be a better brother, how you can be all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's all about self-improvement.
Very cool. So I mean, that's another good segue. I mean, you're talking about like the negative and the positive reviews. So like my next question is on the negative side, right? I mean, obviously you've been in the game for a period of time. You're dealing with probably high-strung individuals that are dealing with marketing sectors. Again, you're dealing with medical. So if anything goes wrong, somebody has to take the blame. So what is the worst example, without naming names, that you've had to deal with or overcome in your business to date?
I mean, what I think for us is the quality of, say, the content that we produce for clients has to be so perfect. Like there isn't much room for error, but there are occasions, say, where a social media post will go live or a piece of content will be produced, and it's not quite right, and you have to then take that on the chin. And I say sorry first and foremost. I think it's one of the things that people don't do. When you make a mistake, you hold your hands up and you say, look, we made a mistake, we got it wrong. But then you investigate it and you look for the root cause and you say, how did that happen, and how we can improve things. So I think most of the clients, in fact all the clients that we work with, are fair, reasonable people on the whole. I mean, it's interesting, we had a really rare experience recently where there was a couple of mistakes in something that we sent to a client, and the CEO effectively ended the contract overnight, which seemed really extreme. But actually, with a bit of empathy, what turned out that CEO had a bad experience with something going out that impacted his business in the past or something like that, and he just would not compromise on the quality standards. And we made a mistake, and we should have caught it in our quality system, and it just, for whatever reason, it didn't get through. But he was pretty. He's like, no, guys, we ain't working with you. End of contract. And I have to say that is super rare. I mean, it's one of the only times it's ever happened, but it's actually a really useful punch in the face for us, quite honestly, as and our team. That, to your point, that it makes us realize how vulnerable we are when we're not at our best. And I think that sometimes that dose of reality is often a silver lining in an otherwise unfortunate situation.
So I mean that leads me to like my next question. I'm just hearing you speak. I mean, obviously you're saying you don't lose that many clients, and you had to get to that point. I mean, obviously in day one you had clients, and like you said, you had to fire half your clientele to kind of get to where you are right now. Like how long, right? And the perception, somebody may be listening to this podcast and they may hear you speak, and it's like this guy, he has everything together, but in reality, how long did it take you to get to where you are currently?
I mean, in literal terms, it's like 18, it's probably 20 years, right? It's the best part of 20 years. And, and I love the phrase on your podcast where description where it's that kind of overnight, 20-year overnight success. And I am very much in that. I'm, I've been very fortunate in my career, and I've reached a point where I have had some success, but it has taken so much failure and effort and time and dedication and all that kind of stuff. And, I, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is actually to give people a dose of reality of all the mistakes and all the things that you get wrong on that journey, because you don't just come into this and nail it kind of overnight. I wish it was. It would be great. And I still it's, I always think you're on a learning journey. And for me now, as I mentioned before, we've just done a private equity investment. So my role in the business has changed. I'm not the only main shareholder around the table anymore. We have other people. We have a wider group of shareholders that we have to think about. I'm now taking on a more visionary founder role, so I'm not as operationally involved day to day. So the business is requiring something different of me than it did 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I have to recognize that and grow into that role. And, we're in the hardest thing for us as entrepreneurs is that means subtracting rather than adding more. Like our hands have to be on less stuff, which is completely counterintuitive to the way that we built our business in the first place. But no, and back to your point, I wouldn't want anyone thinking, hey, this guy's worked it all out and he's kind of knows what he's doing. To an extent, I've been fortunate, and there are some lessons. We niche down, and I think having a real clear focus on a niche, we learn to say no to the wrong type of clients, and we're still very vigilant now in attracting the right type of customers and not people that are going to cause us, a lot of pain. And also just being focused on being good at what we do. Like, it's not that complicated. Like, trying to be the best at what you do, and the cream rises to the top, right? If you're, I run a marketing company, and the first thing I say to my clients, we can do the fanciest marketing in the world. If your service delivery is crap, we can't. That's the worst thing you can do, right? Like, nothing is better than a really a great product or a great service offering, because that's where word of mouth comes from. That's where referrals come from. So it's one of the things that people are just thinking of marketing, like website, social media, content, whatever. It's also your product. It's also what you deliver and how you deliver to your clients. So it's one of the first things I always say to clients, if we're going to put out this beautiful face that your business is fantastic, can you guys actually deliver on this? Because if not, you're going to get some disappointed customers that will promise one thing and get another.
Very cool. I mean, just listen to you speaking. I mean, to your point about like things just don't happen. Like, you have to kind of mold it, and you kind of have to like find yourself, and on that journey to get to where you are. Is there any particular time frame that you would like to go back to and maybe have a 5 minute conversation with yourself and say, okay, do this or don't do this, and that's the only opportunity you have to change anything?
That's a terrific question. I do, in a sense, no, because the kind of all the mistakes and all the learnings have led to where I am today. So that's like the Back to the Future thing. You don't want to change one element, or it all could go in a
Yeah.
different direction. I suppose a slightly different take on that is one thing I did in 2016. Like I, I was going through what felt like a really tough time. I just couldn't quite nail the business, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I read a great book actually called I think it's called The Miracle Morning or The Morning Miracle, and it was about basically getting more getting an hour for yourself in the morning, whether it's to meditate or exercise or be grateful or journal or whatever. And that definitely helped me to like almost get myself aligned with myself of where I wanted to go, and have annual goals and have a lifetime of vision of what I wanted my life to look like. And the irony is we do this for our business all the time, but we don't often do it for ourselves and our families, which makes no sense whatsoever. So if I go back and look at that particular period of time, I wouldn't do anything different. It's actually something that I'm glad I did. And sometimes as entrepreneurs and as business owners, the business is so consuming, right? It just eats us alive. And just finding time for yourself and your own self-development is honestly, it's critical. And for 45 minutes every morning before the kids wake up, before my wife wakes up, that's my time, right? Like that is my undisturbed time to read, to write, to maybe exercise, to meditate, to whatever. That is my time to just align myself for the day. And not everyone is a morning person, so but I wasn't a morning person, but nevertheless, it's absolutely changed my life. And going into your days feeling aligned, in my experience, is you got a much better chance of having a better day than just getting out of the bed and rushing to work and get your laptop on. That's not good for you. Full stop.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I mean, for like the past 10 minutes, I started keeping like a mental log of how many times you said the word focus, and we went back to like naming you the Refocus Boss, and I think you said it maybe 4 times, and it kind of like leads me to like the title of your book, right? The floundering founder, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this refocusing thing, right? So obviously you've floundered to a certain extent to be able to write the content in this book, and you're saying you have some sense of humor you're putting into there. So I want you to kind of like talk about this book and like who should read this book. I mean, obviously founders in the title, but in a wider scope, who should have access to this book, and what are they going to learn from it?
Yeah. So, I mean, founders, entrepreneurs, anyone that's on a business journey relatively early on, particularly service businesses, is very much, if you're running a SaaS business, there'll be elements of this book which will not be. But for many of us, we're just good at something, right? We're good at marketing, we're good at accounting, we're good at something. And then we're good at web building, we're good at design, and we start building a business based on our skill. But that doesn't make you good at business. That makes you good at your skill. And the book is very much based on guiding people through how I kind of navigated that from a business perspective. And it is things we've talked about, like niching down, like learning to say no, like not focusing everything on your competitors. And it's also for people that are just feeling a bit lost, right? Like are just in their journey and they're like, I'm at a juncture. I don't know whether to go left or right. It was designed for people that were in fact at the point I was at that I mentioned before, which was just like, where do I go next? What's my why? And all that kind of stuff. What I would say is that the book's split into like 24 really short chapters. Again, they were short because my audience is founders and entrepreneurs that don't have a great attention span. So I wrote it in a way that if you read for 10 minutes every day, you get through a chapter, right? So you'll nail a chapter in less than 10 minutes. And the first 12 lessons are all quite business focused. They're all about lessons to improve your business journey. But the second half, and what's been really interesting with the feedback is, irrespective if you're a founder or if do anything in life, it's lessons about refocusing yourself and becoming the best version of yourself. And again, it's based on the experience that I've had in my life and what's worked for me. So I would certainly, I mean, anyone who's a founder or an entrepreneur, I suspect, early on in your journey and you've got some growth and traction in your business, I suspect it'll be a useful reminder of things, or it will be something new. You mentioned at the start, like there is a lot of stuff that you'll want a pen and paper, you'll write stuff down. I know that because people have been kind enough to give me that kind of feedback, but there's a whole section around you as a person and, not judging people, networking, what to do in an investment situation, making time to learn. There's an entire chapter dedicated to like, how do you create a learning habit, right? In 10 minutes a day, in 20 minutes a day. Because I detest it when people say, well, I can't find the time to read. I'm like, you spent an hour on your social media today. Like you've
Yep.
You watched Netflix for 3 hours last night. You could definitely make 10 minutes to read a book, right? So I think we are living in a world where we have so much distraction-based media that's desperate for our attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so making sure we are intentional and mindful about where we place our time is, honestly, I think it's a superpower for people. I really worry for the next generation for that part of it, because I
Mm-hmm.
watch, I see in my team, younger team members chronically distracted, right, by their phones and can't live without, like, I don't have any notifications on any device, right? And my team would be like, how on earth can you live without notifications? And I'm like, when I'm ready to go to my phone, when I'm ready to
Mm-hmm.
go, like, it will get my attention on my time, but not on its time, if that makes sense. But I'm in my early 40s now. Like, I'm a bit older to have
Yeah.
made those mistakes, to think like that. But I do worry that people just don't have the mental strength to be able to actually deal with the devices. So apologies, I've just gone completely down a rabbit hole there of
No,
devices.
I think it's wonderful and it gives insight to who you are, and it kind of makes me think about like you growing up in an entrepreneurial household, right? In that environment, right? And obviously, you're writing this book, and this book is about floundering. Did you see your parents have highs and lows in their businesses, and did that kind of help you to become who you are today?
Definitely, I watch my parents. My one of my eldest brother, he had a clothing garment business in the early 90s, late 80s, and that business failed, and my parents actually and my brother lost quite a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's family, actually, their business went into, they used to sell sports like Adidas and Nike clothing, and then some of the bigger companies turned up on retail and they lost their business as well. So we've been around that failure, but we've also been around, I suppose, the work ethic, and I think that's, I look at the example I try to set my kids, like, and I don't know where I got this phrase, I heard this phrase, but they don't necessarily do what they say, but they'll do what you do,
Mm-hmm.
which is just setting the right example. And I think back of, I remember we'd go to like parties or weddings and stuff as kids, and I'd get up at like 11 the next on a Saturday morning, and my dad had gone to the shop like at 7 in the morning, and I'd be like, oh my God, how did he get up and go to work? And like, I'm that guy now, but that work ethic piece, and irrespective, rain, wind, shine, whatever the weather, they have to go to work, and they have to go, and they have to make their money, and have to get the work done to put food on the table, and all that kind of stuff. And I was fortunate of that. We were in a wealthy family, but I didn't want for anything. Like, I was very happy kid, and I was the youngest of three, and managed to get the benefits of being the youngest, because my parents were probably a bit more well off by the time I came around. But to your point before, it definitely is in your early years an example of just seeing your parents work hard and that being the normal. And that's certainly the example my wife and I try to set with our kids.
So I mean, just talk about like your family life now. I mean, obviously you grew up in that environment to where you saw your dad waking up pretty early, and you couldn't figure out how the hell he's doing it. Now you're in his shoes, you're doing it now, and now you have the next generation, his grandkids in front of you. Like, what does your work-life balance look like today?
It's better today than it has been for a long time, if I'm honest. And I it was really bad when my first son was born in the. I was just getting the business off the ground. So I think first 3 or 4 years of the business were around. Then my son was born, my eldest. That was, I look back now and be like, I did not spend enough time with him. But when my second son was born, I remember sitting down with my wife and said, I ain't going to work weekends anymore. I'm done with weekends. And so genuinely to this day, I very rarely work at a weekend. I'll do some planning on a Sunday for the week ahead. My weekends are for my family, and that's it. And then the other thing now is that I try and do is, so between like 5:30 and 7:30 at night, or 6 and 7:30, dedicated family time. So we try and have dinner together. Our youngest son, I'll put to bed or put him in the bath or whatever, and like, because you can't, and I've been fortunate. I have to spend a lot of time with people who are older than me, who say to me, "You'll never get this time back. You'll never ever get this time back." And yes, I could work a few more hours and make a bit more money, but it's time versus money at the end of the day. And like, there's only so much money that you probably need in life, in reality, and it's not necessarily my motivation like it was 10 years ago. So, and I think good open communication with your partner, right? Like, so my wife and I will call each other out in like if we're on our phones around the kids or something like that. So we generally, when we're with the kids, we're not allowed our devices anymore. We'll put them in the drawer or upstairs or something like that. Because again, like, it sets the right example. If I'm talking to my kids and I'm on my phone all the time, like, how can I expect them to not do? I mean, I find it hilarious when parents are screaming at their kids because they're on their phone whilst they are on their phone. I'm like, dude, like, can you not see what's happening right here? So, we're not perfect, and it's always work in progress in terms of that family time. But making time on the weekends, making some time during the week, and in a really perverse way, COVID was really good from that perspective, because we were living in Boston in the US during COVID, and we were kind of alone, and my wife was pregnant as well, and then our third son was born, and so we had to be pretty isolated from everyone because of the risks when pre-vaccination, when no one really knew. And the last thing we wanted was the wife and baby and to get sick and all that kind of stuff. But I look back now and we had like 3 meals a day together, right? We we had such quality time together. And actually now life's gone back to normal. I'm back in the UK now, and similar for you probably on the East Coast, like life's pretty normal at the minute, other than traveling again. And we just don't get that quality time as we did, which is kind of a bit crazy because we were all craving jumping on airplanes and all that kind of stuff. And I do love traveling. Like, it's a big part of who I am. I love seeing the world. I love coming to the US. I mean, in the US quite a bit. I love just traveling around. But you have to, again, back to what I said before, I feel like you have to be quite intentional about your time with your family. And there's something in the book, and if you try and find the time, you'll never find the time. You got to make time. Like, there's a clear distinction between the two. You have to make time for your family, because you'll not find it, because you'll fill it with your inbox and your phone and your social media alerts, etc. Or great podcasts like yours, obviously.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, and I think, like, if I'm remembering correctly, you had brought up something about like the morning routines, and I want to kind of pull that back into this conversation, right? And bringing back your dad into it. You had said that your dad was at the office at 7 o'clock, so that means he had to probably wake up 5, 6 o'clock every single morning to get ready to get to the office. So, like, what are your morning routines? Like, what time do you wake up? And I'm just trying to find like the similarities between your dad and yourself, and it's kind of like I'm painting this picture, but I'm seeing a lot of similarities from past to present.
Um, I will to answer that question, but I'm just going to mention something I did recently, which I'd advise your listeners to do. So my dad's in his 80s now, and I did a podcast recording with him recently. And I don't know where I heard this from, but I recorded an hour and a half interview with my dad, and it's not for public. It was an ask my family, so my brothers and the kids all submitted questions about my dad's life, and so we have this hour and a half of my dad telling the story of his life now captured on like forever now. And the reason I mention it is I think I got this idea from a book or something a while ago, and honestly, like, there's so much about my dad or my mom I did not know but after this interview, you just go a bit deeper. So I thought I'd mention that because I'd recommend it to anyone as a great, before it's too late, right? Because, they're not going to be around forever. And, but my morning routine is probably very different to my dad's. My dad used to get up and then put his clothes on, have some breakfast and go straight to the shop. And it would open, they have a post office. So they opened the post, it was less than an office, and he'd behind the counter at 8 o'clock in the morning, serving the community effectively. My mornings look like I get up between 5:50 and 6 a.m. So I have like a get up before 6 a.m. every morning is kind of a goal. Obviously the normal stuff like, go to the restroom and, brush my teeth, and et cetera. I meditate for 10 minutes. I journal. I make myself a coffee. I read, and then I typically exercise. So I'll do like a home workout, or I'll go running or something like that. And so that's about an hour to an hour 15. So between like 6 and 7:15, that's like my routine. And depending on what project I'm working on. So when I was writing the book, between 7 and 8 a.m. every morning, I would write for an hour. And that was how I ended up writing the book. And so I have like a bit of time in the morning for working on, like, I want to call them personal projects, but projects that need like a lot of time. So I'm starting to think about the second book now. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to make time for an hour or 40 minutes every day. And I'm very fortunate that my wife's super supportive, and she kind of gives me that space in the morning because she knows it's important. And she always laughs in, like, unless you have your time in the morning, you're an absolute nightmare to be around. So it's a kind of a win-win for the family. If I've got up and I've got a good start to my day, the rest of the family seems I'm in a much better mood, much more likely to buy ice cream, right, or whatever, and everyone's happy. So that's how my morning is, and it was very much taken from the Miracle Morning book. The kind of way that he describes his morning, I basically adopted that practice, and I think I'm in year 7 of doing it now.
Wow.
Which is honestly, it's changed my life. Like, getting up early in the mornings has genuinely changed my life. And journaling and reflecting back, it's the type of stuff where, like, and even when I mentioned meditation, there's part of me like, oh my god, people think you're an idiot because you meditate. Like, there is a stigma around journaling and meditation and stuff like that, but I just don't really care anymore. Maybe when I was younger, I'd be like, I'm not telling anyone that I meditate, but I'm like, I'm better for it. I'm more centered for it. I'm more present. I'm a better person to be around. I'm more in touch with other people's feelings, and that can only be a good thing for them and myself. So I'd certainly encourage anyone, especially if you're going through a difficult time, like, try and find that morning time to just center yourself. And it's certainly benefited me, and I'd recommend it to any of your listeners.
Very cool. Very cool. I mean, that kind of leads me to, I mean, earlier on you were talking about an opportunity. Someone should have at minimum a 10-minute opportunity to read books, right? And we were talking about your book a couple different times. And those that are seeing the video behind him is like there's a little library on over his right shoulder. So I want to kind of talk about, I mean, you're very astute as well. Like, what books do you recall that you would like to recommend to an up and coming entrepreneur that helped you to kind of get over your early hurdles?
They're probably, if you don't mind me turning around, they're probably
Yeah.
all on the shelf behind me. Some really good ones. So the one that really, this is an excellent book, which is it's a very old book, but it was the Magic of Thinking Big, is a brilliant book, and just kind of like making you think good about yourself. Any book by Derek Sivers, this one, I don't know if you've seen Derek Sivers before, is absolutely fantastic from an entrepreneurial perspective. I'm really into productivity, and I love books like The One Thing and Essentialism. They really, really helped me very much on kind of my journey.
Mm-hmm.
So the majority of the stuff that I resonate with are a mix of kind of self-development, improvements type books, and kind of quasi business and marketing books is where I kind of generally focus my time. I'm reading a really good book, quite a famous book, Let's Talk About Race. At the minute, I think it's quite a famous book in the US, and my wife read it a couple of times. She's like, you need to read this book. And, as we, as an organization, but as a society, start thinking more about diversity in our organizations and diversity of views, it's actually really educational for me to actually understand what other people kind of go through. So I have quite an eclectic mix in that sense of the types of things that I read. But anything by Derek Sivers, anything by Seth Rogen. I love Tim Ferriss's books. I think they're excellent. The Tools of Titan is a phenomenal book, in terms of you could read it again and again. They're all kind of basic foundational stuff that I would recommend anyone. I'd also I'm a big podcast listener. So like when I'm running or working out or driving or commuting anywhere, I'm always listening to podcasts. I think it's the easiest, most convenient way to learn is the way I look at it. So, I listen to, again, the Tim Ferriss podcast, Michael Hyatt's podcast, obviously your podcast. I listen to, I can't remember what it's called, Cal Newman, who's written a brilliant book called Digital Minimalist. I don't know if you've read it. It is a fantastic book called Digital Minimalist and deep work. He's amazing. And, just like, I also try and listen to some sports, but I'm into soccer and sports. And I think there's a lot you can learn from elite athletes and people who are world-class in their fields that you can apply to your own life and just try to think a little bit more laterally rather than, obviously I engage with agency and type content and other authors and other podcasters and stuff like that. But I think there's a huge amount you can learn from people in different sectors that are world-class at what they do. And that's why I think, the Tim Ferriss podcast is particularly good, because you get this eclectic mix of people from all different walks of life, but you see amazing similarities and themes across different ones.
I mean, since you ended a note on podcasting, I mean, to your point, I think podcasting is like the new way of taking old content and absorbing that content while multitasking, right? And so I want to kind of talk about your podcast, Molecular to Market, right? And I think the tagline is inside the sourcing space. And I think the play on words is definitely interesting right there, right? Because obviously you're talking about molecules and you're talking to pharmaceutical, but you're really talking about them kind of outsourcing to someone else, like their marketing strategy. So I think one particular episode that I listened to was the African biotech butterfly,
Mm.
and it was a pretty interesting episode because it was like the first time, like I guess you had an opportunity to interview someone in that sector and space from Africa, and she was talking so profoundly about what Africa is doing in the economy and what they're doing with pharmaceutical right now. So I want to talk about like how did you even come up with this concept for the podcast, and has it been fruitful for your business?
Well, yes, it's been very fruitful, I have to say, and a little bit like you, I love talk. Like when I'm doing a podcast interviews, I'm learning, and I loved podcasts, so I always fancied having my own podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And Molecule to Market was a concept that I came up with on a flight from Boston to San Francisco. It's just when I moved to the US and I did not realize how long it was to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. I had to like look and be like, is it like 7 hours? This is crazy. In the UK, I would be in Asia by that point in time. So, but I had like 7 hours on a flight, and I remember being right, like, who's this for? And, it is a very niche podcast, right? Because it is very much focused on the sector where my businesses operate, right? So my book's slightly different because my book has got nothing really to do with my business life in the truest sense, because I'm not going to get customers from my book, if that makes sense. It was genuinely here's stuff that I really hope will help people that were in a similar journey or on a similar path to me. It was done for no other reason other than I think I've got some stuff that I can help other people. Whereas the podcast is, I interview leaders, CEOs, C-suite people, founders, entrepreneurs from predominantly companies that work within the pharmaceutical and biotech ecosystem, right? So if I give you, if you take the COVID vaccines, for example, right now, those vaccines would have been developed, packaged, tested, distributed, manufactured by a whole load of companies in the supply chain. And those are the types of companies that we actually typically work with. So I interview guests from those types of companies, or actually from the buyer side as well. And there was nothing like it in the market. And podcasting, it's quite a conservative sector, so no one had kind of, I try to think what the US phrase is, but I can't. No one had the balls to do it, quite honestly. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put something out, and with podcasting, you've got to stick to it, right? It's like a graveyard of dead podcasts out there. And for me, we went big. We had a concept, we did a brand for it, we did a website for it, we lined up some fantastic guests, and we're going to hit 100 episodes. I know you're up to over 100 now, and congratulations, that's an amazing achievement. And we're gonna hit 100 in the next few weeks, and it seems crazy given how niche the industry is, but it's to your point before about the recent guest, it's a global industry. It's a huge market. It's very fragmented. And so you've got so many potential guests that you could interview. And I suppose like the one that you mentioned, the lady, I think we call her the African biotech butterfly. I think we called her in the episode. I mean, what a fantastic guest she was. And she came a bit left field, we came across each other. And it's fascinating being from the West, and you're thinking, what was life like growing up in Africa and access to vaccines and what's happening there from a drug development perspective. It's and it's like that diversity of thinking and getting perspectives from other people in the world is really helpful for yourself and for other people, just to see what's going on. And just, I think because the podcast coincidentally launched when COVID hit, events were all shut down, and it's been a very traditional events, conferences, booths type industry. So people were kind of like, where am I going to get my fix for the industry that I work in, right? Where am I going to get the latest thinking on trends and all that kind of stuff? And people were I think people got a bit bored of webinars and stuff like that. And the thing about podcasts, of course, you do them, you listen on your own time, right? Like, content's there when you want to get it, the content's there when you want to press play on your iPhone or whatever. So it just hit at a good time, and I think that allowed it to get some traction. And yeah, we've been so fortunate, and I love doing it. I probably like yourself, like I love interviewing the guests. I get excited every time I do an interview. I learn something every time I get an interview. I'm often saying to my wife, God, I met this fantastic, interesting guy. And I've had, honestly, I've met some amazing people. And you'll know the thing about podcasting is whatever way you look at it, you connect with people in a much more meaningful way when you interview. Like you and I are doing this today, and you might hit me up in a month's time saying, "Hey, do you know anyone do that?" I'd be like, "Oh yeah, like I'll help you straight away," because I feel like we've had this time together and we've connected and we've and so what I found is it, and for anyone in any industry, if you're confident enough and you can have a go at doing it and you stick to it, you will access people that you would ordinarily never be able to access because you ain't selling them anything. You're giving them an opportunity. We don't charge our guests anything or anything like that. We give them a platform and we let them have editorial sign off if they want to cut anything out. And because the nature of confidentiality in the industry, like we give them full editorial sign off. And what it means is they almost see you as an equal, right? Like a peer. So now I'm out and about at conferences, like I'll get people coming over who will literally, but oh my God, you're the podcast guy. And it's weird because like I'm not using this level, like I'm known in this weird niche of a world, but which is pretty cool. But then it's like, hey, you should come on the podcast. So you bring your CEO on the podcast, and it's kind of like self-fulfilling, which is fantastic. But yeah, so for any of your listeners that are in a very niche sector, it doesn't matter. Like that's like there will be people in your sector that would be interested in hearing whatever the latest trends or whatever kind of interesting stories about individuals. But the key thing about it is it just gets you access to people that you would never, ever, ever be able to access by just selling them your services. And I think that's, in my opinion, has been the most powerful learning of the podcast. It really positions us as a thought leader and a thought facilitator in our space.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it gives us a hierarchy that's been existing but been ignored for a period of time. So when you step into that space and like you're saying, you're giving someone an opportunity to have these conversations that you and I are having. Like when I was doing my due diligence, I had to kind of like research you, and then, so when I come on this call, I feel like I know you, right? So like we're actually having like this conversation versus me just asking random ass questions. So it kind of builds
Totally.
this synergy, right? And I think even like your style of podcasting is great too, because I always give nicknames, and I thought it was really cool that you gave her that nickname. It was like the African biotech, butterfly. Was like you had to think about that, process it. They're like, why would I name her that? And it kind of sticks and it resonates with that person for
Yeah.
sure. So
Yeah, and the creative, I mean, that's given what I do for a living as well. I'm a creative person, and we do we do branding and communications and writing copy. And so I quite like the task. You spend an hour doing an interview like this with someone. You're like, how can I capture this interview in 3 words?
yep.
I actually really like that. And often I just come up with it. And she was like, oh my God, she loved it.
Mm.
And she really like resonated with it, which was always nice. And I don't know what you find as well. Like I've had guests who have been, who, when the podcast goes live, they're overwhelmed when it reaches to their family members and people that don't know their story and actually didn't realize the challenges that they went through. And I remember getting an email once from someone who was really high up in a big pharmaceutical company saying, you'll never know the impact that you had, that this podcast had on my parents. They didn't know half of my story. And I was just like, it's like wanted to cry. I was like, I cannot believe I don't know if you've ever had this one, but we had a really, I did a podcast with a guy a couple of years ago, and it never went live, the podcast, because the guy he was off sick, and unfortunately ended up passing away, the guy. But I had this content that, because I'd interviewed him for an hour, so I messaged his wife a month or two after the funeral and said, look, obviously condolences, etc., but I have this content and that you might really want. And she was like, oh my God, like, yes. He was a guy that I think originally from South Africa and ended up in the US, but he talked about his entire life. And so I captured this like life story of this guy who had like quite quickly passed away and really under very sad circumstances, but his wife was so grateful that, I was like sent to the file, and I think she must have shared it with the family, and like I was like, my God, like this stuff is powerful when you're capturing
Yep.
people's stories and narratives, and we're not all going to be around forever. So
Yep.
it's useful. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the reason why like I continue to do the podcast because I look at it as a standpoint of like this is the way for humanity is designed to procreate and recreate, right? And so again, everyone wants to live forever, and this gives us the opportunity as podcasters to not only voice our story but voice the stories of other people that content can live on forever. So 100 years from now, 50 years from now, our grandkids, whatever, can hear this conversation between us and
Completely,
be
completely.
inspired by it as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that if you're not a podcaster, I would definitely recommend that you dive into it. And on that note, I want you to kind of give like final words of wisdom to someone that's listening to this podcast that's hearing you and saying, okay, you know what? Maybe they have a kid that sells candy, or maybe they're the dad that's getting up 5 o'clock every morning and going to work, or maybe they're like you and they're between multiple different continents and they're just trying to figure out how to juggle things and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously everyone's journeys is individual, and I suppose I come back to basics, which are, you know, keep learning, like keep growing. Like I think that's a really important. It doesn't matter where you are on your journey. If you're on the start of your journey, if you're 50 years in, people I meet who are well into their journeys, the ones that are super successful and never slow down are the ones that just have a curiosity and thirst for life. So I think that is a fundamental one that I also think it sets a fantastic example for your kids and people around you, that kind of thirst for knowledge. And I'm not saying this like I was really studious or anything. This is something that I've developed later in life. And and one of the big themes of the book is just be the best version of yourself you can, right? Like you only get one shot at this, so
Yeah.
give it your best, right? You don't want to be, I think, at the start of the book, we talk about, imagine, meeting yourself, before, your, I think we talk in the book, imagine meeting the version you could have become, right? When your time is up, you meet the version you could have become. You'd
Mm.
be devastated if you did that guy was much better than you are. You'd be like, oh my God, like I didn't fulfill, and you want them to be the same person, right? And so that's the way I look at life: is project forward 10 years and think, what will I regret if I don't start making meaningful steps now? And I think it will unlock things much bigger than I need to lose 20 pounds or whatever. It'll be, I need to spend time with my parents. I need to make sure I've got an hour an evening with my kids, like stuff that you'll never regret in life. So that would be my kind of parting words of wisdom, if
Nice.
that's what we call them.
Nice. So, how does someone get in contact with you? I mean, obviously, you have a podcast, you have a website. Like, what social media profiles do you want to share?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the easiest way, I mean, the kind of catch all is if you go to ramansehgal.com, which is just my full name.com. That's kind of that portal to access I think they will give away the first couple of chapters free on the book there. So if you want to dive into the book and get the e-copy, and then you can do that. Obviously, you can buy it on Amazon and all that type of stuff. Or just find me on LinkedIn. Look for Raman Sehgal on LinkedIn. Ain't many of us knocking around in the world. I actually think I'm wearing this shirt on my profile, so that's just coincidence. So yeah, hook me up whenever. I love connecting with new people, and hopefully today's resonated, and you've left with some value. And yeah, just thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a great show and a great platform for entrepreneurs to share their stories. So I feel very grateful that you've given me the space to talk today.
Well, I definitely appreciate you being here for sure. And I mean, it's kind of like just hearing you speak and hearing your story and like what you put into your podcast. Not every podcaster does that. So I definitely appreciate that because there's podcasters and then there's people that really dedicate themselves to podcasting and growing with influence. So I definitely commend you for that.
Thank
Um,
you.
Going into like a bonus question, and I think for you, it's going to be pretty interesting because I have no clue what you're going to say. But if you could spend 24 hours with anyone, right? That person could be dead or alive, and you're spending those 24 hours uninterrupted with them. Who would it be and why?
Oh my gosh, such a fantastic question. Oh, I don't know why this person comes to mind, but I think someone like Leonardo DiCaprio,
Okay.
and the only reason he's one of those people who I think he would be really good fun, and he doesn't seem to do bad movies. Like like if you, I cannot think of a bad movie he's done, and I'm not a super fan of his or anything like that.
Yeah.
I look at his body of work. I look at the person, like you look at all the environmental stuff that he's got. He seems like a very nice, likable guy, and I think like I would want to spend 24 hours with someone that I'd have a lot of fun with, but I would probably learn something from, rather than, I don't know, saying Einstein or whatever and being like, but I'd probably not understand 95% of what was being said. I would rather probably just party with someone for 24 hours and be like, that was a good time and I learned something. So, and it's funny because I didn't know you were going to ask me that question. And that weirdly was the first name that came to mind.
Very
I
cool.
should have said my wife. She's going to listen to this and say, "What about me? Why are you wanting? You never spend time with me, right?"
Well, it's funny that you said that because I used to say all the time, everyone except for like your like your kids or your immediate family, just for that reason, because I always say like I don't want anybody to end up sleeping on the couch. So I'm going to say it right now to your wife, he shouldn't sleep on the couch because we're going to ad lib that in there. We were talking about just 100% business.
Exactly. Just a kind of bonus second question. I mean, I was very young when my paternal grandfather passed away. So he named me, and he died when I was 1 or 2. So there's pictures of me with him. But he was an entrepreneur, and he built a steel business in India, and he had 5,000 staff.
Wow.
And my mum says that I remind her of him. And none of his sons are anything like it. Like, so my dad had 7 brothers, and none of them are like him.
Wow.
But my mum's convinced that like I am so much like him. And it used to be here a poem. In fact, there's a poem that I'm not going to read it, but there's a poem about humility that he wrote before he passed away, and it's a little bit religious and stuff like that. But like, I mean, the fact that it's called humility, I think, tells you a lot about the man that built such a good business. So I think, away from the celebrity partying with Leo, I think 24 hours to see what type of guy my granddad would be pretty cool as well.
I could totally see that. I could totally see you taking that 24 hours and having an opportunity to do what you did with your dad and record a podcast with him.
Absolutely.
To
Yeah, I'll do
capture
20.
his thoughts.
I'll do 23 hours with Leo, and I'll do an hour with my granddad, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I could totally see that. I mean, because again, to your point, he doesn't know the person that you turned out to be. So by interviewing him, you may have an opportunity to kind of see so many similarities that probably were instilled in your dad that are instilled in you today.
Absolutely. You're probably right. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah. So in closing, man, I mean, obviously you're a fellow podcaster, and I love interviewing podcasters because I'm giving you an opportunity to become the host of the Boss Uncaged podcast. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
What do you do differently now on your podcast that you didn't when you started?
First and foremost, systems. Like in the first year, it was just more so kind of like going through my Rolodex and contacting people to see if they want to be on the show. But now, like, and I'm sure you probably or your staff got some of my systems. It's a form, it fills out, it sends updates, it sends all this different stuff. And then all that content kind of make me a better podcaster because now I was doing my due diligence before, but I was spending so much time doing all the research. And I was like, why don't I just ask the people I'm going to interview to give me some insight? So by giving that insight, now I can kind of dive in and piece these puzzle pieces together versus season 1, I was doing it, but I was more so struggling versus now I could do it with so much more ease and I could really focus on that content.
You know what's really funny is before, I got a reminder an hour before we were doing it today saying an hour to go. And I've been forwarding your emails to my team saying, look how polished this guy is with his automation system. So it is super, super impressive. I'm sure I'm going to send you a separate message saying how the heck did you set it all up? But it's very slick and it still feels quite personalized, which I quite like. So it doesn't feel like automatic. And I love the Google form that you send through just to get that piece of information in advance. And if you don't mind me asking as well, like of all the, you've done 125 interviews now, what is there 2 or 3 themes that you see again and again and again? I appreciate every interview is slightly different, but are there if someone said like, if it stopped today and like, what are the 3 themes that you got through, not every episode, but you kept seeing again and again? I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, in realistic times, I've posted 125, but I've actually recorded over 300 episodes. So we're like backlog 200 episodes right now. And the reoccurring theme that I hear over and over and over and over and again is it's said differently. Even you said it differently, right? I mean, obviously you're going to be posed with a hurdle, but figuring out how to kind of keep overcoming the hurdle and knowing that more hurdles are coming. And if you can kind of stay in that space to realize that, okay, things are good right now, but something negative may happen, but I'm not going to focus on that negative. But when that negative comes, I'll be prepared to overcome
Yeah,
that negative and keep going north. That's the reoccurring thing that I hear from every single entrepreneur, business owner, and founder.
that's a great one. I remember, I don't know if it was Spotify or Shopify. It was one of the founders of one of those businesses was on a podcast, and he talked about it's like it might be playing a video game, and you reach one level,
Yep.
and there's another level. You got to get the bigger dragon, then the bigger dragon, then the bigger dragon, then the bigger dragon, and that is the same concept, really. And
Yep.
yeah, that's fascinating that you hear that again and again.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful the way you described it, because I mean, obviously, with the levels on video games, usually on the first level, you have to take something with you to the second level. Without getting that first thing from that first level, you may not be able to win on that second level. So it's like an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, it's the same thing. If I had a client that I lost, what did I learn from that, and how do I not lose any more clients on the next level? So you take all
Yeah,
these elements, and you're take. It's like taking a bag of gold on your shoulders, and you're paying as you go. You're paying as you
yeah,
go.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
keeping
yeah.
it more gold in that, and it gets you farther and farther down the road.
No, that's fascinating. I have one more final question, just
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I've got you in this. This is quite fun. Um, was there a guest that I say surprised you, but was there one guest that you recall that when you finished, you were just like, "Wow, that was unbelievable." Was there anyone that really knocked you off your chair in terms of you wanted to tell people immediately?
I mean, literally, I would say 9 out of 10 are like
Wow.
that. Like literally, at this point in my podcasting career, in year one, there were great personal people that I knew firsthand. But now going into like, see, we're closing out season three, and we're getting ready to start season four. And season four, I would say, is about 90% of people like you and I are meeting for the first time, having this conversation. And I'm thinking that the systems that I have in place right now and the way I'm getting these people, every last one of them, including yourself, is like a legend in what they do. And it's kind of like I'm always enamored and like at the end of the conversation. It's not like, how the hell did I get this privilege to interview someone like this on this caliber to be able to tell their story and leave that story for the next generation? So for me,
Yeah,
it's 9 out of 10 people.
which is amazing. Yeah, congratulations. I imagine just also as your time goes on, the quality of your guests and that you are just going to probably, I don't want to mean improve because it's
Yeah,
not in a disrespectful or disparaging way to any of your former guests, me included, obviously, but you you are going to continually attract people of bigger businesses and actually bigger hurdles and all that kind of stuff. So it's fantastic that you're on that journey and that you're getting value from it as much as obviously putting out great content for people.
yeah, yeah. And if I could just like pinpoint maybe one person, I think it was recently I had an interview with the founder of Redfin, the real estate app,
Mm,
and doing the due diligence, I didn't realize that he had worked hand in hand with Jeff Bezos, and he was the guy that helped write the algorithm that we use today. So at first glance, I was like, okay, it's another person I'm interviewing, and I'm like, this is not just a regular person I'm interviewing. Like he is the reason why everyone is spending so much money on Amazon, and he's also the
wow.
reason why people are using his app, and he's on a whole nother business sector right now. So he's built and sold and built and grown like three or four businesses, and I was just kind of like, yeah, this is a whole nother level of information that I didn't even know I was going to be able to speak to on that particular day.
Amazing. And what's your favorite podcast other than your own?
Ah, man, there's so many. I mean, obviously Tim Ferriss is definitely great. I mean, Joe Rogan is
Yeah.
definitely great, and I think like literally it's so many because I listen to every single person that I interview that has a podcast as well. So it's
Okay.
kind of like trying to juggle and memorize all of them, but I have all of them in my list, so I'll go through them just like yours. Like that one particular episode, I was just scanning through them, and I was like, interesting title. Let me listen to it. I
Yeah.
listened to it, and I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
great information, but I'm at the segment. Okay, I'm gonna put his podcast maybe every Thursday morning when I go for a jog. I'll listen to this episode and
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
it in the
Yeah.
schedule. So,
That's good. That's good.
yep.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me asking you some questions as well.
I mean, I definitely appreciate it. I mean, I think for me, it's just one of those things. It's kind of like when you're doing this interview, like we're interviewing each other, but I'm interviewing more you and trying to give you opportunity to ask questions because you may have questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I definitely
Yeah.
appreciate you
Absolutely.
being on the show today. I think it was a hell of an adventure, and I think that with your business structure and just your business acumen is just it's phenomenal. I mean, the fact that you're dual coast, right? I mean, some people they're dying to conquer one state or one city, but you're kind of like on multiple different aspects of the world. You're international, so I definitely appreciate you being here and giving the value to our listener.
Thank you. No, and I just want to reiterate my gratitude for having me on as a guest. You've had some amazing guests, so I feel very honoured to be on that list. And looking forward to connecting with you in the future and getting to know you, and hopefully getting one of those t-shirts off you one day because I like your swag.
Sure, definitely. We could definitely make that happen, man. I definitely appreciate you. And again, for the listener, I want you to remember the name, man. It's the Refocus Boss, and you can kind of obviously see why I'm calling him that. It's all about focusing and harnessing what you've learned and how to utilize it moving forward. S.A. Grant, over and out.